For 30 years, Dr. Michael Porter stopped hearts. It was his job. Open heart surgery, the kind where you literally cut open a chest, cool the body to near freezing, stop the heart completely, and then, if you're skilled enough, if you're fast enough, if you're good enough, restart it before the patient crosses the line from which no one returns. Michael was good enough. 10,000 surgeries. 10,000 hearts restarted. A success rate that made him one of the most sought-after cardiac surgeons in the country. But on a cold November night, 3 months ago, Michael's own heart stopped. And for 3 minutes and 17 seconds, Dr. Michael Porter was clinically dead. Brain activity flat. No pulse. No breath. No life. Death is real. Michael had always known that. What he didn't know, what 30 years of materialist certainty had never prepared him for, was what came after. Because in those 3 minutes, Michael encountered something impossible. Not angels. Not demons. Not the white-bearded God of his childhood Sunday school or the absolute nothingness his atheism promised. He encountered something far stranger. An extraterrestrial consciousness. A being that had traveled across galaxies to study one specific phenomenon that occurs in millions of species across the universe. The moment when biological life ends and something else begins. And what this being showed Michael, what it revealed about the 3 minutes after death, about consciousness, about the choice every soul faces, would shatter everything he thought he knew about existence. This is that story. The story of what happens 3 minutes after you die. And why it changes everything about how you should live. Subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell. Because what you're about to discover isn't theory. It isn't religion. It's what one man experienced when he crossed the threshold and returned with proof that death is not the end. And if you're ready to go even deeper, to truly understand your own eternal nature and reconnect with the divine essence that exists beyond your physical body, check out our ebook, Reconnecting with Your Divine Essence, in the first pinned comment below. Now, let's begin with the man who thought he had all the answers, until his heart stopped beating. Dr. Michael Porter was 52 years old and absolutely certain of 3 things. First, that the human body was nothing more than an extraordinarily complex biological machine. Second, that consciousness was an emergent property of neurological processes. Neurons firing, chemicals releasing, electrical impulses creating the illusion of a self. And third, that when the brain stopped functioning, when the heart ceased pumping oxygenated blood to those neurons, consciousness ended. Completely. Permanently. Absolutely. There was no soul. No afterlife. No divine judgment. Just the elegant, terrifying simplicity of biological death followed by decay. Michael had believed this with the fervor most people reserved for religion. And in a way, it was his religion, materialism, the doctrine that matter was all that existed, that everything could be explained by physics and chemistry and biology, that anything supernatural was simply superstition not yet dispelled by scientific understanding. He'd arrived at this worldview in medical school 27 years ago. There had been a patient, an elderly woman dying of pancreatic cancer, who'd begged him, actually begged him, to pray with her, to ask God to take away her pain. Michael had been 25, exhausted from a 36-hour shift, covered in another patient's blood, and so far past his emotional limits that he'd simply looked at her and said, God isn't going to help you. Morphine will. She died 6 hours later. Alone. Terrified. Crying for a salvation that never came. And Michael had made a choice in that moment. A choice that would define the next 3 decades of his life. He would never lie to patients about false hope. He would never pretend that prayer or faith or divine intervention would save them when only medicine, cold, hard, evidence-based medicine, had any chance at all. He became an atheist not out of rebellion but out of mercy. It was kinder, he believed, to accept the truth of mortality than to cling to comforting delusions. But here's what Michael never admitted to anyone, not to his colleagues, not to his ex-wife, not even to himself in the darkest hours of insomnia that plagued him more and more as he aged. He was terrified of death. Absolutely, existentially, bone-deep terrified. Because if consciousness was just neurons firing, if the self was just an illusion created by brain chemistry, then death meant annihilation. Not sleep. Not peace. Not reunion with loved ones in some celestial paradise. Just nothing. The complete and permanent cessation of everything that made Michael who he was. Every memory, every thought, every feeling, erased. As if he'd never existed at all. And at 52, with graying hair and persistent chest pain he kept dismissing as stress, with an ex-wife who'd left him because he was emotionally unavailable and a daughter who barely spoke to him because he'd chosen his career over her childhood. Michael was running out of time to matter. His life's work, 10,000 hearts restarted, 10,000 lives saved, would mean nothing when his own neurons stopped firing. No one would remember him in 100 years. His name would disappear. His consciousness would blink out like a candle in the wind. And there was nothing, absolutely nothing, he could do about it. So Michael did what he'd always done. He controlled what he could control. He worked 80-hour weeks. He perfected his surgical technique until he could operate in his sleep. He published papers and gave lectures and built a reputation as the best in his field. If he couldn't live forever, he could at least leave a legacy. Even if that legacy would eventually fade to nothing in the vast, indifferent cosmos. On the night everything changed, Michael was alone in the hospital's on-call room. It was 11:30 p.m. on a Friday. He'd just finished a 7-hour aortic valve replacement on a 68-year-old man whose heart had been failing for months. The surgery had gone perfectly. The patient was stable. Michael should have felt satisfied. Instead, he felt the familiar emptiness that had become his constant companion. Another heart saved. Another day closer to his own death. Another night alone with thoughts he couldn't silence. His chest hurt. It had been hurting on and off for weeks. A dull, persistent ache that he'd been attributing to stress and poor sleep and too much coffee. Cardiologists make the worst patients. They know too much. And Michael knew that chest pain in a 52-year-old man with a family history of heart disease and a high-stress career was something he should have addressed months ago. But he hadn't. Because addressing it would mean admitting vulnerability. Would mean facing the reality that his own heart, the organ he'd spent 3 decades repairing in others, might be failing. At 11:47 p.m., the pain shifted. It went from dull and ignorable to sharp and crushing. A vice around his chest, squeezing, radiating down his left arm, up into his jaw. Michael sat up on the narrow cot, his medical training kicking in even as panic began to rise. Myocardial infarction, he whispered to himself. Heart attack. Probably the left anterior descending artery. The Widowmaker. He should call for help. Press the emergency button beside the bed. Alert the nurses' station. Get himself to the ER immediately. But he didn't. Because some part of him, the part that had spent 30 years running from the existential terror of his own mortality, couldn't accept what was happening. This couldn't be it. Not now. Not here. Not alone in an on-call room at 52 with an estranged daughter and an ex-wife and a life that had been all work and no meaning and no love and no peace. The pain intensified. Michael tried to stand, but his legs buckled. He fell back onto the cot, gasping, his vision beginning to tunnel. His last conscious thought, before everything went dark, was this. I was right. There's nothing after this. I'm about to become nothing. And then Dr. Michael Porter's heart stopped beating. The pain disappeared. That was the first thing Michael noticed. One moment, crushing agony. The next, nothing. Just absence. His eyes were closed. Or he thought they were. It was impossible to tell because he couldn't feel his eyelids. Couldn't feel his face. Couldn't feel his body at all. Brain hypoxia, his medical mind supplied automatically. Neurons shutting down. Hallucinations common in the final moments before. And then he opened his eyes. Except he didn't have eyes to open. Because Michael was floating near the ceiling of the on-call room, looking down at his own body on the cot below. His body. Unmistakably his. The gray hair, the surgical scrubs, the way his left hand was clutching his chest even in unconsciousness. But he wasn't in that body. He was here, hovering, watching, completely and impossibly aware. This isn't real, Michael thought. Except the thought wasn't in his brain, because his brain was down there, in that body, not receiving oxygen, dying. The thought was, somewhere else. Everywhere. Nowhere. The door burst open. 2 nurses rushed in, Jessica, the night shift charge nurse, and a younger one whose name Michael couldn't remember. Jessica's eyes went wide when she saw him. "Code Blue," she shouted, hitting the emergency button. "Dr. Porter's in arrest." Michael watched, detached, analytical, as the resuscitation team flooded in. Watched them cut open his shirt. Watched the defibrillator paddles charge. Watched his own body jolt with electricity. He should be feeling that. He should be in pain. He should be unconscious. Instead, he was thinking with perfect clarity, "This is impossible. Consciousness requires a functioning brain. My brain has no oxygen. This cannot be happening." "Come on, Dr. Porter. Don't you dare die on me," Jessica muttered, pressing on his chest, counting compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Michael could hear her. Every word. Crystal clear. No, clearer than clear. He could hear the fear in her voice, the determination, the way her breath caught slightly on die because she knew him, had worked with him for years, and couldn't process that he might actually be gone. He tried to speak. Tried to say, "Jessica, I'm right here. I'm fine. But he had no mouth. No vocal cords. No body. And that's when the terror hit. Real, primal, all-consuming terror. Because Michael's materialist certainty had just shattered. Consciousness wasn't supposed to persist without a brain. This was neurologically, biologically, physically impossible. Which meant everything he'd believed for 30 years was wrong. He watched them inject epinephrine. Watched them shock him again. Watched the monitor flatline. 90 seconds of cardiac arrest now. His brain cells were dying. Permanent damage would begin at 3 minutes. "We're losing him," someone said. And Michael felt a pulling sensation. Not physical. Something deeper. Like he was being drawn away from the scene below, away from the hospital, away from the physical world entirely. He tried to resist. Tried to stay. Because if he left, if he let go, that would mean. The room began to fade. The sounds became muffled. And Michael found himself in darkness. Not the darkness of closed eyes or a dark room, but absolute, infinite darkness. A void. And in that void, he could feel something. A presence. Vast. Ancient. Intelligent. Watching him. No, Michael thought desperately. This is just neurons firing randomly in a dying brain. Hallucination. DMT release. Oxygen deprivation. There's a scientific explanation for. And then a light appeared. Not the fluorescent lights of the hospital. Not the kind of light that comes from bulbs or stars or fire. This was something else entirely. A luminosity that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. Blue-white, brilliant, but somehow not painful to look at. And in that light, something began to take form. A shape. Humanoid, but not human. Tall, maybe 7 feet. Slender. Skin that looked almost translucent, with a faint luminescence of its own. A head larger than human proportions. And eyes. Oh God, those eyes. Enormous. Almond-shaped. Completely black, but with depth, like looking into space itself, into infinity. Michael's terror reached a crescendo. This wasn't possible. Aliens didn't exist. The universe was vast, yes, but the chances of intelligent life visiting Earth, of one appearing in a hallucination, of, "Hello, Michael." The words didn't come through ears. They appeared directly in his consciousness, fully formed, perfectly clear. Michael tried to scream. Couldn't. Tried to run. Couldn't move because he had no body to move. The being stepped closer, moving through the void as if walking on an invisible floor. "You're afraid. That's natural. Your mind is trying to categorize an experience it has no framework for. But I need you to understand something very important, Michael." Michael's panicked thoughts raced. Hallucination. Dying brain. This isn't real. Can't be real. This is real. The being's massive eyes seemed to look through him, into him, seeing everything, every thought, every memory, every fear, every secret he'd ever hidden. My name is unpronounceable in your language. Your species would call me a consciousness researcher. I study the transition you're currently experiencing. The moment when biological life ceases and awareness continues in a different form. No, Michael thought. Consciousness doesn't continue. Consciousness is neurons. When they stop, I stop. This is a dying hallucination. You're not real. If I'm not real, how do I know that your daughter Emma called you 3 days ago, and you let it go to voicemail because you were afraid she was calling to tell you she's getting married and didn't want you to walk her down the aisle? Michael's entire being went still. That was true. Exactly true. He'd seen Emma's name on his phone, felt the familiar panic. The fear that she'd replaced him, that another man would walk her down the aisle, and he'd let it ring. No one knew that. He hadn't told anyone. And I know that the real reason you became an atheist wasn't intellectual. It was emotional. You watched a woman die in agony, begging for divine help that never came, and you decided it was kinder to believe in nothing than to believe in a God who would allow such suffering. Michael felt something crack inside him. The being wasn't just reading his mind. It was seeing his soul, seeing the moment that had defined 3 decades of his life. Michael, I'm going to show you something. Something that will eliminate all doubt about whether this experience is real. The void around them shifted. And suddenly, Michael could see the hospital room again. Could see his own body on the cot. Could see Jessica still doing compressions. Could see the defibrillator charging for a 3rd time. Could see the clock on the wall reading 11:49 p.m. 2 minutes of cardiac arrest. Watch closely. Jessica shocked him again. Michael's body convulsed. The monitor showed a brief flutter, then flatlined again. Damn it, Jessica breathed. Dr. Chen, should we call it? The attending physician, a man Michael had mentored years ago, shook his head. One more round. He's too stubborn to die. When you return to your body, the being said calmly, you will remember this exact moment. Jessica will have said my name wrong. She'll call Dr. Chen Dr. Chan by mistake, and he won't correct her because the situation is too urgent. You will tell her about this conversation, about what she said, and she will know, without any possibility of doubt, that you heard everything while you were dead. And as Michael watched, Jessica said, Dr. Chan, what drugs should we? Just keep going, the doctor interrupted. The being turned those infinite eyes back to Michael. Do you believe me now? Michael wanted to deny it. Wanted to cling to some rational explanation. But there wasn't one. There was no way his dying brain could fabricate this. Could know what was being said in a room his unconscious body couldn't hear. Yes, Michael finally thought, the word feeling like surrender. I believe you're real. Good. Because Michael, you have 3 minutes and 17 seconds of clinical death. And in that time, I'm going to show you what actually happens when a human being dies. Not what your religions teach. Not what your materialist science claims. But what actually occurs. The hospital room faded completely. The void returned. And Michael felt himself moving, being pulled through something that felt like space itself was bending. Your first question is usually, am I dead? Am I? Michael thought. Your body is. Your heart has stopped. Your brain has no oxygen. But you, the consciousness that observes, that thinks, that asks that question, you're very much alive. More alive than you've ever been. Because consciousness, Michael, doesn't require a brain. The brain is a receiver, not a generator. And what I'm about to show you will prove it beyond any shadow of doubt. And with that, the being reached out with one elongated hand and touched Michael's forehead. Except Michael didn't have a forehead. But he felt the touch anyway. Felt it resonate through his entire being. And everything changed. The touch wasn't physical. It was something deeper, a connection, consciousness to consciousness, that bypassed the need for bodies or language or any physical medium. And through that connection, Michael felt the being's presence fully. Felt the vast intelligence behind those dark eyes. Felt the patience of a species that had been studying consciousness for millions of years. Felt the compassion, yes, compassion, though alien and strange, of a researcher who'd watched countless beings transition through death and knew exactly what Michael was experiencing. "Let me show you who I am," the being communicated. "So you understand why you can trust what I'm about to reveal." Images flooded Michael's awareness. Not visual exactly, more like direct knowing. Information downloaded straight into his consciousness. He saw worlds. Dozens of them. Planets orbiting distant stars, each teeming with life. Some with beings like humans. Some with consciousness so alien that Michael couldn't even process their form. And on each world, the being and others like it had been there. Observing. Studying. Learning. "We are consciousness researchers," the being explained. "Your science studies matter. We study awareness itself. And one of the most fascinating phenomena in the universe is what happens when biological life ends and awareness transitions to a different state. You're saying every species has an afterlife?" Michael thought, still struggling to process. Not afterlife. Continuation of consciousness in a different form. Some of your religions stumbled upon partial truths. But they wrapped those truths in dogma, in tribal claims of exclusivity, in fear-based control mechanisms. The reality is simpler, and far more extraordinary, than any religious teaching. Michael felt his scientific mind trying to engage, trying to analyze. But consciousness is emergent. It's what happens when neurons reach a certain complexity. When the neurons stop, the emergence should stop. The being's response wasn't words but a feeling, something like gentle amusement mixed with understanding. "That theory is backwards, Michael. Neurons don't create consciousness. They receive it, filter it, focus it into the narrow band necessary for physical survival. Consciousness is fundamental. Matter is the emergent property. That contradicts everything we know about neuroscience." "Does it? Then explain how you're thinking right now. Your brain has no oxygen. Your neurons aren't firing. Yet here you are, thinking, remembering, questioning, fully aware. How is that possible if consciousness comes from the brain?" Michael had no answer. Because the being was right. He was aware. More aware than he'd ever been. Every thought crystalline clear. Every perception vivid. His consciousness was functioning at full capacity despite his brain being clinically dead. I don't understand. That's why I'm here. To help you understand. But first, you need more proof. Because a part of you still believes this might be a hallucination. A dying brain's last desperate attempt to create meaning before extinction. How did you? I can perceive your thoughts, Michael. All of them. And I know what you need. You need evidence so undeniable that when you return to your body, you'll have no choice but to accept that this experience was real. Return to my body? I thought I was dead. You will be given a choice. But we're not there yet. First, the proof. The being gestured, and the void around them became transparent. Michael could see, no, not see, perceive. A vast network of connections, like threads of light connecting every conscious being on Earth. Billions of threads. Each one a life. A soul. A center of awareness experiencing existence through a physical body. Watch, the being commanded. One thread brightened. Michael's attention was drawn to it automatically. And suddenly, he was there, not physically, but aware. Aware of a young woman in Tokyo, alone in her apartment, thinking about her grandmother who'd died 3 weeks ago. Thinking about how much she missed her. Thinking. And then the grandmother's presence appeared. Not physically. The old woman was dead. But her consciousness was there, surrounding the young woman with love, with comfort, trying desperately to communicate. I'm still here. I'm okay. Don't grieve so much. The young woman couldn't hear the words. But she felt something. A warmth. A presence. And she smiled through her tears and whispered, I hope you're at peace, grandmother. Your daughter felt you. 3 nights ago, the being said gently. When she couldn't sleep, when she was crying about the distance between you, you were there. Your consciousness reached out to her, even while your body slept hundreds of miles away. She felt it as a sudden warmth, a sudden knowing that maybe you still loved her after all. She almost called you. But fear stopped her. Michael felt something break inside him. Emma. His little girl. No, not little. She was 28 now. But still his daughter. And he'd been so locked in his own fear, his own certainty that love was just biochemistry and connection was just evolutionary programming for survival, that he'd never allowed himself to feel what was happening between them. Is this real? Michael thought, his entire being trembling with the question. Please. I need to know. Is any of this real? It's real. And I'm going to prove it to you in a way you cannot deny. The void shifted again. Michael found himself back in the hospital room, but time was moving differently. He could see himself, his body, still on the cot. But now he could also see forward, into what would happen in the next few hours. He saw the attending physician finally getting a heartbeat back. Saw himself being rushed to the ICU. Saw the ventilator, the monitors, the 4 drips. And then he saw something else. Something that would happen 6 hours from now. Something he couldn't possibly know about. His ex-wife, Catherine, would come to the hospital. She would sit beside his bed, holding his hand, crying. And she would say something specific, something private, something only she would know to say. Michael, if you can hear me, I forgive you. For the divorce. For everything. I know you were just scared. Please come back. When you wake, the being said, you will remember this vision. And when Catherine says those exact words, you will know, beyond any shadow of scientific doubt, that you didn't hallucinate this experience. That I am real. That consciousness continues. That everything you've believed for 30 years was wrong. Michael felt tears he couldn't cry, felt emotions he'd suppressed for decades threatening to overwhelm him. Why? He whispered into the void. Why are you showing me this? Why me? Because you asked. I never asked for this. Not consciously. But your soul, the eternal part of you that chose to incarnate into Michael Porter's body 52 years ago, has been screaming for answers since the day you turned away from that dying woman and chose intellectual certainty over spiritual truth. You've been searching for meaning your entire life, even while telling yourself meaning doesn't exist. And now, at the moment of your death, your soul's cry has been answered. I don't have a soul. I'm just neurons and chemistry and... You are consciousness experiencing human form, the being interrupted gently but firmly. Not human form occasionally experiencing consciousness. And right now, with your human brain offline, you're beginning to remember what you've always been beneath the temporary identity of Michael Porter. The being's hand touched Michael's awareness again, and suddenly he felt it. Felt the truth of what it was saying. Felt himself as something vast, something eternal, something that had existed before Michael Porter was born and would continue after his body returned to dust. It was terrifying and beautiful and overwhelming and right. Show me, Michael said, his resistance finally crumbling. Show me everything. I'm ready. The being's eyes seemed to shine with something that might have been approval. Then let's begin with what happens in these 3 minutes. Let's start with the tunnel. And the void began to move. Michael felt it before he saw it. A pulling sensation, like being drawn forward by an irresistible current. Not physical force, but something that operated on consciousness itself, pulling him toward. What? He couldn't tell yet. The darkness around him began to shift. What had been infinite void suddenly had dimension, had direction. And ahead, far ahead, impossibly far yet somehow close, a point of light appeared. Don't resist, the being communicated, staying close beside him. What you're experiencing is the transition between frequencies. Your consciousness is shifting from the dense physical vibration to a higher dimensional state. The pulling intensified. Michael felt himself accelerating, moving through what could only be described as a tunnel, though it wasn't made of matter. It was structured consciousness, a pathway carved through dimensions. The light ahead grew brighter. The sensation of movement became overwhelming, faster and faster, rushing towards something Michael couldn't name but somehow recognized. What is this? Michael thought, a mix of terror and awe coursing through him. You're changing stations, the being explained, its voice calm amid the chaos of movement. Think of physical reality as a radio frequency. Your brain was the receiver, tuned to pick up a very specific, very narrow band of reality. When the brain dies, consciousness isn't destroyed, it simply shifts to a different frequency. What you're experiencing now is that shift. The tunnel walls, if they could be called walls, seemed to pulse with colors Michael had never seen before. Not colors that existed in the physical spectrum. His human eyes couldn't have perceived them. But he could see them now, brilliant and alive and impossibly complex. Your species has documented this experience thousands of times. The being continued as they moved. You call them near-death experiences. But your materialist scientists dismiss them as dying brain hallucinations, even though they occur when the brain shows zero activity. They ignore the evidence because it contradicts their paradigm. But what about the science? Michael's analytical mind grasped for something solid. What about neural correlates of consciousness? What about the fact that you're thinking right now without a functioning brain? The being interrupted gently. Michael, you've spent 30 years studying the radio receiver and declaring that music doesn't exist because you can't find it inside the machine. But music isn't created by the radio. It's transmitted through it. The metaphor clicked. Michael suddenly understood with perfect clarity. Consciousness isn't generated by neurons, he thought slowly. It's received by them, translated by them, focused by them into the narrow band necessary for physical experience. Exactly. The brain is an interface, not a source. It filters infinite consciousness down to the specific stream needed for a human body to navigate physical reality. When the brain dies, the filter is removed. Consciousness expands back to its natural state. They were moving faster now. The light ahead growing from a point to a circle to a blazing brilliance that somehow didn't hurt to look at. But if that's true, Michael thought, then every major scientific institution, every neuroscience department, every textbook I've ever read has it backwards, the being finished. Not from malice, but from limitation. Your science measures matter beautifully, but consciousness operates at a frequency your instruments can't detect. It's like trying to measure love with a ruler. The ruler works perfectly for measuring length. It's just the wrong tool for measuring what you're trying to measure. Michael felt something shift in his core understanding. The certainty he'd built his entire identity upon, that he was just a body, just biochemistry, just neurons accidentally producing the illusion of self, was crumbling. If I'm not my brain, he thought, then what am I? That, the being said as the light ahead suddenly expanded to fill Michael's entire perception, is what you're about to discover. And then they were through. The tunnel ended. The movement stopped. And Michael found himself in. He didn't have words for it. It wasn't a place. Not in any physical sense. But it had presence, had reality, had more realness than any location Michael had ever visited in his physical life. The light here wasn't coming from a source. It was everywhere, everything, intrinsic to existence itself. And it wasn't just light. It was alive, conscious, aware. Michael tried to orient himself, tried to find a ground or sky or reference point. There was none. He was simply here, suspended in consciousness itself. Welcome, the being said, to what some of your traditions call the bardo. The in-between. The space that exists outside linear time, where souls process their just-lived life and prepare for what comes next. I don't understand. Michael's thoughts felt small in this vast space. If I'm dead, shouldn't I be judged? Shouldn't there be a bearded man on a throne deciding whether you go to heaven or hell? Michael felt what might have been the alien equivalent of a smile. No, Michael. There's no external judge. But there is a review. A life review. And that's what happens next. You're about to experience every moment of Michael Porter's 52 years, not from your perspective, but from everyone else's. You're about to feel the impact you had on every person you encountered. Michael felt a surge of panic. Wait, I'm not ready. I can't. You don't have to be ready. It simply happens. 3 minutes after death, every human experiences this. Not as punishment. As education. As understanding. As the soul's way of learning from the life just lived. The light around them began to shift, to coalesce, to form something new. And Michael realized with growing horror, his entire life was about to play out before him. Every moment, every choice, every person he'd helped, and every person he'd hurt. And he would feel all of it. The light condensed into images. No, not images. Experiences. Fully immersive, multidimensional experiences more real than memory. More vivid than any moment Michael had lived in his physical body. Time doesn't exist here as it does in physical reality. The being explained as the first scene began to form. You'll experience 52 years in what feels like moments, yet each moment will be complete. Don't try to control it. Just observe. Just feel. The first memory crystallized. Michael at age 7, pushing a smaller boy off a swing set because he wanted a turn. Simple childhood cruelty, forgotten within hours of happening. But now, Michael didn't just see it. He felt it. He felt the other boy's surprise, the sudden pain of hitting the ground, the humiliation of being pushed in front of other children. The way that moment had made the boy feel small and powerless and unsafe in a world he'd thought was safe. The emotion hit Michael like a physical blow. Shame, hot and immediate, flooded through him. That was nothing, Michael tried to defend. Just kids being kids. It didn't matter. Everything mattered, the being said quietly. Every action creates ripples. Watch. The scene fast-forwarded. The boy, Tommy, Michael suddenly remembered his name, went home that day and became quieter, more cautious. The pushing incident, combined with other small cruelties he'd experienced, helped build a belief. I have to be careful. The world isn't safe. People will hurt me. That belief shaped Tommy's adolescence, his relationships, his career. Made him hold back, play it safe, never quite trust anyone fully. One moment. One thoughtless push. Decades of ripple effects. I didn't know, Michael thought, genuine anguish building. I was 7. I didn't know. That's why this review exists. Not to punish you, but to help you understand. Now watch this. The scene shifted. Michael was 22, in his second year of medical school. A fellow student, Sarah, had asked him on a date. She was brilliant, kind, and clearly nervous about the invitation. Michael had said no. Not because he didn't find her attractive, but because a relationship would distract from his studies. He'd been polite, efficient, cold. Thank you, but I don't have time for dating right now. Now, Michael felt what Sarah had felt in that moment. Hope collapsing. Rejection cutting deeper because she'd built up so much courage to ask. The story she told herself. I'm not good enough. He can see something wrong with me that I can't see. That rejection, small to Michael but monumental to Sarah, had reinforced her already shaky self-worth. She'd stopped asking people out. Had settled for a relationship with someone who treated her poorly because she didn't think she deserved better. And Michael had never known. Never thought about that moment again. God, Michael thought, the weight of these realizations crushing him. How many people did I hurt without even knowing? Everyone hurts people, the being said without judgment. That's part of physical existence. The density, the separation, the forgetting of who you really are, it creates pain. But watch what else you did. The scene shifted again. Michael was 38, in the cardiac ICU. A patient's wife, elderly, terrified, had been standing in the hallway, crying silently. Michael had been exhausted, coming off a 14-hour surgery. He'd had every reason to walk past, to get to the on-call room, to sleep. But he hadn't. He'd stopped, put a hand on her shoulder, looked her in the eyes and said, "He's stable. The surgery went well. He's going to make it through the night. You can see him in a few minutes." Now, Michael felt what she had felt. Relief so intense it was almost painful. Gratitude beyond words. And something else, a moment of connection, human to human, that had made her feel seen, cared for, not alone in her terror. That moment had sustained her through 3 weeks of her husband's recovery. Had given her hope when everything seemed hopeless. Had been, she would later tell her grandchildren, one of the kindest things anyone had ever done for her. Michael had never known. had walked away and forgotten about it completely. The small kindnesses matter more than you realized, the being said. That 30-second conversation affected her more profoundly than most of your 7-hour surgeries. Because in that moment, she felt loved. Tears Michael couldn't shed burned through his consciousness. The review continued. Decades compressed into eternal moments. Every interaction, every choice, every word spoken or withheld. He felt the pain of the nurse he'd berated in front of patients, her humiliation burning through him as if it were his own. He felt the loneliness of his daughter Emma every time he'd cancelled plans, every recital missed, every birthday forgotten because of work. He felt his ex-wife Catherine's slow dying of hope through their marriage as she realized he would never let her fully in, would never be emotionally present, would always hold himself apart. But he also felt the unexpected moments of grace. The homeless man he'd given $20 to without a second thought. Michael now felt how that money had bought the first real meal the man had eaten in 3 days, had restored a small piece of his dignity, had made him feel human again. The young resident he'd mentored, Michael felt the confidence that mentorship had built, the career it had launched, the hundreds of lives that resident would go on to save because Michael had taken time to teach. The random smile he'd given a stranger in an elevator. Michael felt how that stranger had been contemplating suicide, how that simple human acknowledgement had interrupted the spiral of dark thoughts, how she'd gone home and called a friend instead. Every ripple, every consequence, good and bad, intended and unintended, known and unknown. The weight of it all was crushing and liberating at the same time. Do you see now? The being asked as the review finally slowed. Do you understand what your life meant? Michael's consciousness trembled with the enormity of it. I hurt so many people, he thought. Without even trying. Without even knowing. Yes, and you helped so many people, also without even knowing. Your life was both light and shadow, kindness and cruelty, connection and separation. Like every human life. But the pain I caused Emma, Catherine, the people I shut out because I was so afraid to feel anything. Yes, the being agreed simply. And that pain will be the foundation of your transformation. Because now you understand what you couldn't understand before. You felt the impact of emotional shutdown. You felt the ripple effects of choosing fear over love. And you can't unknow that, Michael. Michael floated in silence, absorbing, processing, feeling the full weight of 52 years of unconscious living. Is this hell? He finally asked. Is this punishment? No. This is education. Hell comes next, but only if you choose it. What do you mean? The being's presence shifted, became more serious. Michael, we need to talk about heaven and hell. Because they're not what you think they are. The light around them shifted, reorganizing itself into new forms. Michael felt the being guiding his awareness, showing him something that existed outside physical space but was nonetheless completely real. I'm going to show you 2 states, the being communicated. 2 frequencies of existence that your traditions call heaven and hell. But you need to understand from the beginning, they're not destinations assigned by divine judgment. They're vibrational states you choose, moment by moment, based on your dominant thoughts and emotions. The light condensed into a vision. Michael found himself perceiving what could only be described as a realm of extraordinary beauty. Colors beyond the physical spectrum, more vivid than anything Earth contained. Structures that seemed to be made of crystallized music and light. And souls, he could sense them now, other consciousnesses, moving through this space in states of perfect peace. Some were alone, others in groups. Some appeared to be learning, others creating, others simply existing in states of bliss Michael had never imagined possible. And everywhere, pervading everything, was a presence. Love didn't adequately describe it. It was acceptance so complete that every soul here felt utterly safe, utterly seen, utterly cherished exactly as they were. This is what some call heaven, the being explained. But it's not a place you go to after being judged worthy. It's a frequency, a vibration. Souls exist here when they're vibrating at frequencies of love, peace, joy, gratitude, acceptance, unity. Michael felt the truth of it. The realm wasn't constructed. It emerged naturally from the collective vibration of the souls within it. It's beautiful, Michael thought, longing surging through him. Can I stay here? That depends on your frequency. Watch. The being shifted Michael's awareness to a different state. And everything changed. The colors drained away. The music-light structures dissolved. The sense of love and safety disappeared, replaced by something heavy, oppressive, isolating. Michael found himself perceiving a gray realm. Not dark, there was light here, too, but filtered through fog, muted, lifeless. And souls moved through this space as well. But they weren't at peace. They were trapped in loops of their own thoughts, reliving painful memories, judging themselves, punishing themselves. Some appeared to be reliving moments of cruelty they'd inflicted, feeling the pain they'd caused, unable to forgive themselves. Others were trapped in shame, convinced they were unworthy of love, of peace, of anything good. Others burned with anger, at themselves, at God, at the universe. Their rage keeping them locked in a frequency of suffering. And the most heartbreaking part, they were choosing it. No demons tormented them. No external force punished them. They punished themselves, believed themselves unworthy of anything better, and their beliefs created the reality they experienced. This is what some call hell, the being said quietly. Not eternal damnation imposed by an angry God, but a frequency of consciousness characterized by fear, judgment, separation, guilt, shame, anger. Souls exist here when they're vibrating at these low frequencies. Michael felt horror wash through him. But they're trapped. They can't get out. They can get out at any moment. Watch. The being drew Michael's attention to one particular soul. A man who'd been trapped in this state for what Michael somehow knew was the equivalent of decades. The man was reliving a moment when he'd abandoned his family. Left his wife and children with nothing. Ran away because he was too afraid, too overwhelmed, too broken to stay. And ever since his physical death, he'd been trapped in that moment. Feeling the pain he'd caused. Condemning himself. Convinced he deserved nothing but punishment. He believes he deserves hell, the being explained. So hell is what he experiences. But watch what happens when belief changes. The being approached the suffering soul, and Michael witnessed something extraordinary. The alien consciousness touched the man gently, and somehow, through that touch, helped him see something new. The man's awareness expanded. He saw not just the pain he'd caused by leaving, but the pain he'd been carrying that had driven him to leave. He saw his own fear, his own woundedness, his own brokenness. And in seeing it fully, something shifted. Compassion arose. Not for those he'd hurt. He'd already felt that, already drowned in guilt over it. But compassion for himself. For the terrified man who'd run because he didn't know how else to survive. The moment compassion touched his consciousness, everything changed. The gray fog around him began to lift. The oppressive weight lightened. And slowly, gradually, the realm he existed in transformed. Not instantly to heaven, but movement in that direction. Shifting frequency. Rising vibration. This is the truth your religions forgot, the being said to Michael. Hell is real. But it's not eternal. It's not imposed from outside. It's chosen from within. And the moment a soul chooses differently, chooses forgiveness, chooses love, chooses to release self-judgment, the frequency shifts. And hell dissolves. Michael's entire understanding of existence was reforming. So when I died, he thought slowly, I could have gone to that place. Based on my guilt, my fear, my self-judgment. You were headed there, the being confirmed. Your dominant frequency for the last 30 years has been fear. Fear of death, fear of feeling, fear of connection. Those are low vibrations. Michael, you were creating your own hell long before you died. Michael felt the truth of it. The emptiness he'd carried. The isolation. The constant, gnawing anxiety. I was already in hell, he whispered. I just didn't know it. Exactly. And that's the teaching. Heaven and hell aren't future destinations. They are present moment states. You create one or the other with your thoughts, your beliefs, your emotional vibrations. Every moment, you're choosing. But my atheism, Michael said, clinging to the last piece of his old worldview. Was I wrong? Is there a God? The being paused, and Michael sensed it was carefully choosing how to answer. What you call God is not a bearded man on a throne. God is the fundamental consciousness that underlies all existence. The source from which all awareness emerges. Pure, infinite, unconditional love. Your atheism was right that religion had it wrong, that the judgmental, petty, tribal gods humans created were projections of human fear, not ultimate reality. But your atheism was wrong in declaring that consciousness ends, that meaning doesn't exist, that you're just atoms accidentally arranged. Because you, Michael Porter, are consciousness itself, temporarily focused into physical form. You always have been. You always will be. Michael felt something crack open in his chest. Not pain, but release. Then the woman I turned away from, he said, thinking of the dying patient who'd asked him to pray. When she died, she went to the frequency she vibrated at, the being said gently. Her faith, not in religious doctrine, but in love, in connection, in something beyond herself, kept her vibrating high. She experienced peace. Your refusal to pray with her didn't condemn her, Michael. It only wounded you. Tears Michael didn't have streamed through his awareness. I've wasted so much time, he thought. 30 years afraid of something that isn't even real the way I thought it was. Not wasted. Learned from. Every experience teaches. Even wrong beliefs serve a purpose. They show you, eventually, what's true. The realms around them began to fade, returning to the neutral, luminous space they'd started in. Michael, you've seen the truth now. You understand that consciousness continues, that you create your experience through your vibrations, that hell is chosen and heaven is always available. But there's one more thing you need to do before you can truly choose your next frequency. What? You need to face your deepest shadow. The part of you that created all this suffering. The part you've been running from your entire life. Michael felt fear rise again. I don't know if I can. You can. And I'll help you. Because until you heal this wound, until you forgive this part of yourself, you'll keep creating hell no matter which realm you're in. Michael trembled. What shadow? What part of me? The terrified medical student who chose emotional shutdown over feeling. The 25-year-old who looked at a dying woman and decided love was a lie. The part of you that's been so afraid of death that you built a prison of certainty to hide in. The being extended its hand. It's time to meet him. It's time to forgive him. It's time to set yourself free. The luminous space around them shifted, became more intimate, more personal. Michael felt the being's consciousness guiding his awareness inward, deeper than he'd ever gone. Close your eyes, the being instructed. I don't have eyes to. Close your awareness. Turn inward. And see him. Michael did. And there, in the space of his own consciousness, a figure began to form. A young man, 25 years old. Exhausted. Wearing surgical scrubs stained with blood. Eyes hollow from sleep deprivation and something deeper. A woundedness so profound it had threatened to break him entirely. Michael recognized him instantly. This was himself. The version of Michael Porter who'd stood in that hospital room 36 hours into a shift, looking at a dying woman begging for prayer, and made the choice that would define 3 decades. Talk to him, the being encouraged gently. He's been waiting for you. I don't know what to say. Start with seeing him. Really seeing him. Not as a mistake you made, but as a human being doing his best to survive. Michael looked at his younger self. Really looked. The young man was shaking slightly. His hands trembled. Behind his eyes was a terror Michael had forgotten he'd ever felt. You were so scared, Michael said, the realization washing over him. The young man nodded, tears streaming down his face. Tell him what you see, the being prompted. You'd been working for 36 hours, Michael said slowly. You were covered in another patient's blood. You'd just spent 7 hours trying to save a man who died anyway. And then this woman, she looked at you like you could save her soul, and you knew you couldn't. You knew there was nothing you could do. And it terrified you. The young man's voice came out raw. I was so tired. So tired of people dying. So tired of watching pain I couldn't fix. And she wanted me to pray, to believe in a God that would let her suffer like that. And I couldn't. I couldn't pretend anymore. What was he protecting himself from? The being asked Michael. Michael looked deeper and saw beneath the exhaustion, beneath the cynicism, to the core wound. You were protecting yourself from caring, Michael said softly. Because if you cared, if you felt the full weight of all that pain, all that death, you thought it would destroy you. So you chose numbness. You chose certainty. You chose to believe it meant nothing, because that was easier than believing it meant everything and you were powerless to stop it. The young man collapsed, sobbing. I didn't know what else to do. I was just trying to survive. And Michael felt it. Felt the impossible weight this young man had been carrying. The expectation to save lives, to be God, to fix what was fundamentally unfixable. And the terror of failing, of not being enough, of watching people suffer and die despite his best efforts. You were just a kid, Michael said, and he meant it. You were 25 years old, and they put you in charge of life and death, and no one taught you how to hold that much pain without breaking. Now comes the important part, the being said, the forgiveness. Michael felt resistance rise. But here's the reason I've been so closed off. Here's the reason I lost Emma, lost Catherine, spent 30 years afraid to feel anything. He made the only choice he knew how to make in that moment, the being said firmly. And he's been carrying the guilt of that choice for 3 decades. He's been trapped in his own hell, Michael. Just like the man you saw earlier. Convinced he deserves punishment. Convinced he's unforgivable. Michael looked at his younger self. Saw the shame, the self-hatred, the crushing weight of 3 decades of judging himself as weak, as broken, as wrong. And something shifted in Michael's consciousness. This wasn't an enemy. This was a terrified kid who'd done his best with impossible circumstances. I forgive you, Michael said, and felt the words resonate through every layer of his being. The young man looked up, disbelieving. I forgive you for shutting down. I forgive you for choosing safety over vulnerability. I forgive you for building walls that kept everyone out. You were just trying to survive, and that's okay. You did the best you could. The young man's form began to glow. Softly at first, then brighter. I forgive you, Michael continued, feeling something unlocking in his chest. And more than that, I understand you. I see why you did what you did. And I don't hate you anymore. I don't judge you anymore. You were enough. You've always been enough. The light intensified, and Michael felt something he'd never felt in his entire life. Compassion for himself. Not pity. Not excusing. But genuine, deep compassion for the wounded human being he'd been, trying to navigate an impossible situation with limited tools. The young man's form dissolved into pure light, and that light flowed into Michael, integrating, healing, completing something that had been fractured for 3 decades. He's not separate from you, the being explained. He never was. You've been carrying him this whole time, locked in shame and judgment. But now he's free. Now you're free. Michael felt it. Felt the weight lifting. Felt decades of self-imposed punishment dissolving. And then, out of the light, another figure appeared. A young woman, 16 years old. With Michael's eyes and Catherine's smile. Emma. But not the 28-year-old Emma who existed in physical reality. This was Emma at 16. The age she'd been when Michael had moved out. When the marriage had ended. When she'd lost both her father and her family in one devastating blow. Dad? She said, her voice small. Michael's entire being trembled. Emma. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I left. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I was so afraid of failing you that I ran away. And Emma stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. But she was smiling. Dad, I already forgave you. Years ago. I forgave you. How? How could you? I abandoned you. Because I understand now. You were so broken, Dad. So scared. And I know you loved me. I always knew you loved me, even when you couldn't show it. She reached out and took his hand. And Michael felt her presence, Not just this vision, but the real Emma, his adult daughter, somehow connected to this moment across space and time. Dad, I felt you 3 nights ago. When I was crying, when I was thinking about calling you. You were there. I felt you with me, even though you were miles away. And I knew you still cared. Michael pulled her close, holding his daughter in a dimension beyond death, feeling more love than he'd allowed himself to feel in 30 years. I love you, Emma. I love you so much. I'm so sorry I didn't know how to show it. I know, Dad. I know. And it's okay. We have time. You're going back. You're getting a second chance. I am. She pulled back, looking at him with wisdom beyond her 16 years. You have a choice. Stay here, or go back. But if you go back, you have to go back different. You have to go back willing to feel, willing to connect, willing to love even though it's scary. Can you do that? Michael felt the weight of the question. Could he? Could he return to physical life, knowing now what he knew, and actually live differently? I don't know if I'm strong enough. Emma squeezed his hand. You are. You just proved it. You faced your shadow. You forgave yourself. That's the hardest thing a human can do. Everything else is easy after that. The light around them began to intensify. Michael felt the being's presence again. It's time, Michael. Your body is being revived. 3 minutes and 17 seconds have passed. You've died, you've learned, and now you have a choice. Stay in these realms, process your life, eventually move to higher frequencies, continue your soul's journey in non-physical form. Or return to your body, to physical life, with everything you've learned, with the mission to bridge science and consciousness, to teach what you now know. The choice is entirely yours. Emma looked at him with love. I can't come back, Dad. But you can. And you have work to do. Tell people what you learned. Help them understand they don't end. That's your purpose now. Michael felt torn. The peace here was profound. The suffering of physical life seemed so heavy in comparison. But Emma was right. He had work to do. He looked at the being. If I go back, will I remember all of this? You'll remember enough. The human brain can't hold the full experience. It would overwhelm your nervous system. But the essence will remain. The truth you've learned will stay with you. And it will change everything. Michael took a deep breath, or the consciousness equivalent. I'll go back. I'll live differently. I promise. Emma hugged him one more time. Then wake up, Dad. Wake up and live. The transition was violent. One moment, Michael was in the luminous space, holding his daughter, surrounded by peace and understanding. The next, he was being slammed back into density, into heaviness, into a body that felt like a prison after the freedom of non-physical consciousness. Pain exploded through his chest. His lungs burned. Every nerve screamed. And then a sound, rhythmic, mechanical, artificial, beeping. Heart monitor. He was in his body. Back in physical reality. Michael gasped, his eyes flying open, and immediately regretted it as fluorescent hospital lights stabbed into his retinas. His back, someone shouted. We got him back. Hands on his shoulders, holding him down. Medical equipment surrounding him. The ICU. He was in the ICU. Michael tried to speak, but there was a tube down his throat, ventilator. He panicked, fighting against it, and then felt hands on his face, gentle but firm. Dr. Porter, you're okay. You're in the hospital. You had a heart attack. We've got you. Don't fight the tube. It's helping you breathe. Jessica's voice. The night nurse. Michael's eyes focused on her face, and recognition sparked in her eyes. You're awake, she said, tears streaming down her face. You were gone, Dr. Porter. 3 minutes. We thought we'd lost you. 3 minutes and 17 seconds, Michael thought. I know exactly how long. Over the next hour, as they stabilized him, removed the ventilator, and transferred him to a monitored bed, Michael's scientific mind tried to convince him it had all been a hallucination. Dying brain. DMT. Oxygen deprivation. There were explanations. There had to be. But then Jessica came back, checking his vitals, and Michael remembered. "Jessica," he said, his voice rough from the tube. "Yeah, Dr. Porter. When my heart stopped. You said something." She looked at him strangely. I don't remember. It was pretty intense. "You said, 'Come on, Dr. Porter. Don't you dare die on me.' And then you called Dr. Chen Dr. Chan by mistake. And he didn't correct you because you were too focused on keeping me alive." Jessica's face went white. She actually stepped backward. How could you possibly know that? You were dead. Your brain wasn't." "I heard you," Michael said simply. "I was there. I was watching from somewhere else, but I was there." Jessica stood there, frozen, her hand over her mouth. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I know," Michael said. "And yet." She left the room without another word, and Michael was alone with his thoughts. The hours passed. Doctors came and went, amazed at his recovery. "Miracle," they kept saying. "We don't see people come back after that long very often." Michael didn't tell them what he'd experienced. Not yet. He wasn't ready. But as dawn broke through the hospital window, 6 hours after his resuscitation, the door opened again. And Catherine walked in. His ex-wife. The woman he'd shut out for 15 years of marriage. The woman who'd left him because he was already gone, even when he was physically present. She looked older than he remembered. Tired. But her eyes filled with tears the moment she saw him awake. "Michael," she said, crossing to his bedside. "They called me. They said you died." "I did," Michael said quietly. Catherine sat down, taking his hand, a gesture of intimacy they hadn't shared in a decade. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice breaking. "I've been holding this for years, and if I don't say it now, I never will." Michael's heart, his newly restarted, still fragile heart, began to race. Because he knew what she was about to say. The being had shown him. "Michael, if you can hear me," Catherine began, tears streaming down her face. "I forgive you. For the divorce. For everything. I know you were just scared. I know you didn't know how to love without being terrified of losing someone. And I forgive you for that. I should have said it years ago, but I'm saying it now. Please come back." The exact words. The exact emotion. Everything the being had shown him. This wasn't a hallucination. This was proof. "Catherine," Michael said, his own tears flowing freely now, "I heard you. When I was gone, I heard you. Someone showed me." He stopped, not knowing how to explain. "Showed you what?" "That I've been living in hell. That I've been so afraid of death I forgot how to live. That I hurt everyone I loved because I was too scared to actually love them." Catherine stared at him, shocked by the raw emotion in his voice. Emotion he'd never allowed himself to show in all their years together. "And I'm sorry," Michael continued. "I'm so sorry, Catherine. You deserved someone who could be present, who could be vulnerable, who could love you the way you deserved. And I was too broken to be that person. Michael, what happened to you out there?" He looked at her, this woman who'd tried for so long to reach him, and made a decision. "I died. And I learned something. Something I need to tell everyone. Something that changes everything." 6 days later, Michael was released from the hospital with a stent in his left anterior descending artery and instructions to reduce stress, change his diet, and attend cardiac rehabilitation. But Michael had different plans. 1 week after his death, he called Emma. She answered on the 3rd ring, surprise evident in her voice. "Dad." "Emma, I need to tell you something. 3 nights ago, did you feel anything strange? Any sense of presence?" There was a long silence. Then, "How did you know about that?" "Because I was there. I don't know how to explain it, but I was there with you. And I felt your pain. And I'm so sorry, Emma. I'm so sorry for every time I wasn't there. Every time I chose work over you. Every time I let you think you didn't matter." "Dad, what?" "I died. Last week. My heart stopped for 3 minutes. And in those 3 minutes, I saw things learned things. And one of them was that you tried to call me, and I let it go to voicemail because I was scared. I'm not scared anymore, Emma. Can we talk? Really talk? More silence. Then her voice, thick with tears, I'm getting married. In 6 months. I wanted to ask you. I wanted you to walk me down the aisle. But I thought you'd say no. Michael felt joy and grief crash together in his chest. I would be honored, he said. I would be so honored. 3 months later, Dr. Michael Porter stood in a lecture hall at the University of Colorado Hospital, addressing an audience of 50 people, medical professionals, hospice workers, grief counselors, and ordinary people who'd lost loved ones and needed to understand death differently. This wasn't his operating room anymore. This was his new mission. For 30 years, Michael began, his voice steady but warm. I believed that when the heart stops, when the brain dies, consciousness ends. I believed we're just biological machines, and when the machine breaks, there's nothing left. He paused, looking out at the faces watching him. I was wrong. He told them about his cardiac arrest. About the 3 minutes and 17 seconds his heart didn't beat. About the consciousness that persisted despite the dead brain, the being he'd encountered, the realms he'd perceived. But most importantly, he told them about what he'd learned. Death isn't the end. It's a transition. Your loved ones, the ones you've lost, they haven't disappeared. They've shifted to a different frequency, a different dimension of consciousness. And they're okay. More than okay. They're at peace. An elderly woman in the front row raised her hand, tears streaming down her face. My husband died 3 months ago. How do I know? How do I know he's really okay? Michael stepped off the stage, approaching her gently. Because consciousness is fundamental. Not created by the brain, but received by it. When the brain dies, the receiver stops working, but the consciousness, the essence of who your husband was, continues. Changed, transformed, but continuing. But I can't see him. I can't feel him. You can, Michael said softly. Not with your physical senses, but with your awareness. In the quiet moments, when you feel a sudden warmth, a sudden knowing that he's near, that's real. That's him, reaching across frequencies to let you know he hasn't left you. The woman sobbed, and Michael held her hand, offering the comfort he'd been too afraid to offer anyone for 3 decades. After the lecture, a young physician approached him. Dr. Porter, I have a patient. Terminal pancreatic cancer. Days left. She's terrified. Can you talk to her? Of course. That afternoon, Michael sat beside Eleanor's hospital bed. She was 68, skeletal from the cancer, breathing with difficulty. Eleanor, I'm Dr. Porter. I'm not here as your physician, but as someone who died and came back. Her eyes focused on him with surprising clarity. You died. For 3 minutes. And I can tell you, what comes next isn't what you've been taught to fear. He told her, gently, about the tunnel, the light, the review. About the love that permeates everything. About the continuation of consciousness. About the peace that waits. Eleanor listened, tears streaming down her face, and by the end, something in her had changed. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by calm. Thank you, she whispered. I'm not afraid anymore. She died 6 hours later, peacefully, a slight smile on her face. The nurses told Michael later that her last words were, "It's beautiful." He was right. Michael left the hospital that evening with something he'd never felt after a patient's death: gratitude. Not grief, not failure, but gratitude that he'd been able to help her transition with peace instead of terror. This, he realized, was his purpose now. Not saving bodies, though he'd return to surgery eventually, part-time, when his own heart was stronger. His real purpose was helping people understand that death isn't the enemy. Fear is. That night, Michael had dinner with Emma. Really dinner, not the rushed, distracted meals they'd shared in the past. They talked. Really talked. About her fiancé, about the wedding, about the years of distance between them. I felt you that night, Emma said. The night you died. I was lying in bed, crying, thinking about how much I missed you. And suddenly I felt this warmth, this presence. And I knew somehow that you still loved me. Michael's eyes filled with tears. I did. I do. I was there, Emma. I don't know how it works, but I was there. She reached across the table, taking his hand. I'm glad you came back, Dad. I'm glad I get to know this version of you. 3 months after his death, Michael had rebuilt his relationships, changed his career focus, and was living with a purpose he'd never had before. He still struggled sometimes. Old patterns of emotional shutdown tried to resurface. Fear still whispered that connecting with people meant risking pain. But now he had tools. He had understanding. And most importantly, he had experienced something that most people only read about. He died, learned the truth, and returned to share it. And now, I need to speak directly to you. If you've watched this far, if you've stayed with Michael's journey, it's not a coincidence. Something in you resonates with what he learned. Maybe you fear death. Maybe you've lost someone and need to know they're okay. Maybe you're questioning everything you've been taught about consciousness, about meaning, about what happens when we die. Here's what Michael's experience teaches us. First, death is not the end. Consciousness continues. The you that observes, that thinks, that feels, that doesn't cease when the brain stops. It transitions. It shifts frequency. It continues. Second, life review is real. One day, you'll experience every moment of your life from everyone else's perspective. You'll feel the impact of your actions, your words, your presence. The small kindnesses matter more than the big achievements. The connections you make matter more than the success you accumulate. Start living now as if you'll one day review this life. How would you change? What would you do differently? Third, heaven and hell are not destinations. They are frequencies. States of consciousness you create moment by moment through your thoughts, your emotions, your beliefs. When you vibrate at frequencies of love, gratitude, peace, compassion, you're experiencing heaven now. When you vibrate at frequencies of fear, anger, guilt, shame, you're experiencing hell now. You don't have to wait until you die to change frequencies. You can choose differently right now. Fourth, forgiveness is the key to freedom. Michael spent 30 years imprisoned by self-judgment, by guilt, by the belief that he was broken and unworthy. The moment he forgave himself, truly, deeply forgave himself, everything changed. Who do you need to forgive? And more importantly, can you forgive yourself? Fifth, you have a purpose. Michael thought his life was meaningless, that consciousness was accidental, that nothing mattered. But he learned that every life has profound purpose, even when that purpose is invisible. You chose to be here. Your soul chose this life, these challenges, these specific circumstances. Why? To learn, to grow, to evolve, to contribute something unique that only you can contribute. Trust that your life has meaning, even when you can't see it yet. Sixth, connection is eternal. Those you've lost, parents, siblings, friends, children, they haven't disappeared. They've shifted frequency. And one day, you'll be reunited. Not because of religious doctrine, but because consciousness is indestructible. Seventh, the fear of death is the last prison. When you release it, truly release it by understanding that death is just a transition, you become free to actually live. Michael spent 30 years running from death, and that fear poisoned every relationship, every choice, every moment. Don't make the same mistake. So what do you do with this knowledge? Start today. Right now. With these practical steps. Begin each day with gratitude. Before you check your phone, before you do anything else, think of 3 things you're genuinely grateful for. This shifts your frequency instantly from fear to love. Live as if you'll review this life. Before you speak, before you act, pause and consider. How will this feel when I experience it from the other person's perspective? This transforms how you treat people. Forgive yourself and others. Who are you carrying resentment toward? Who have you not forgiven, including yourself? That unforgiveness is keeping you in hell frequency. Release it. Choose freedom. Reduce your fear of death. Understand it as a transition, not an ending. When you do, you stop wasting life avoiding death and start actually living. Connect deeply with those you love. Don't wait. Don't assume there's time. Be present now. Be vulnerable now. Love fully now. Find your purpose. Even if it's unclear, trust that you're here for a reason. Pay attention to what calls you, what moves you, what feels meaningful. Choose heaven frequency daily. Every moment, you're choosing love or fear, connection or separation, gratitude or complaint, peace or anger. Choose consciously. If you want to deepen this understanding, to truly reconnect with your divine essence and discover the eternal nature of your consciousness, we've created a comprehensive resource for you. Our book, Reconnecting with Your Divine Essence, provides the complete framework for understanding consciousness beyond the body, healing your deepest wounds, and living from heaven frequency starting today. You'll find the link in the first pinned comment below this video. Subscribe to this channel and activate notifications, because every week we share stories like Michael's, stories of transformation, of cosmic truth, of the journey from fear to freedom. Stories that remind you, you are eternal, you are loved, and you are here for a profound purpose. Leave a comment and tell us, have you ever had an experience that made you question the finality of death? A dream, a feeling, a moment of knowing that consciousness continues? Share your story. You might help someone else who's struggling with these same questions. If this content resonates with you and you want to support our mission of spreading this truth, consider becoming a channel member or leaving a super thanks. Every bit of support allows us to continue creating content that transforms fear into understanding. Dr. Michael Porter died for 3 minutes and 17 seconds. In that time, he discovered what billions of humans fear most: death. And he learned it's not an ending, it's a doorway. You don't have to die to live differently. You can start today. You can choose heaven frequency right now. You can forgive, connect, love, and live with purpose. Because in the end, Michael learned what the alien had been trying to teach humanity all along. Death is not the opposite of life. Fear is. And the moment you release fear, you begin to truly live. You are consciousness experiencing human form, not human form occasionally experiencing consciousness. That changes everything. You are eternal. You are loved. You are here for a reason. And death? Death is just going home. Until the next story, remember, the 3 minutes after you die will reveal truths you can choose to live by right now. Don't wait for death to teach you how to live. Wake up today. Choose love today. Be present today. Because this life, right now, is your opportunity to experience heaven. Thank you for being here. Thank you for opening your mind to these truths. And thank you for being willing to live differently. See you in the next story.